For our COBT friends, it's Maynard, Mike, and Todd here with something super special. This was requested by us. We reached out to a good friend, Pat Wood. He's the CEO of the Hunt Energy Network, and his pedigree in energy and regulatory and technology and business is really unprecedented. He was the chairman of the Public Utility Commission under George W. Bush in Texas in the late 90s. He went on to become chairman of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission in Washington, D.C. And so he has seen it from all sides. And most recently, he is seeing it as the CEO of Hunt Energy Networks, which is 140 megawatts, I think, right now.
210 as of this afternoon.
210. I knew you were building more since I read that bullet point. But so they are doing batteries, and they are doing a small gas-fired, and really doing energy backup systems all across the state. He'll tell us all about it. But from all these angles, including one of the best angles he has, he's one of the most optimistic guys I know. So we're super excited to talk to you, Pat.
Thanks, Maynard. I'm sure some of your colleagues know, but you and I had our first bonding experience hunting elk at a way too high altitude for us two Gulf Coast boys that just panted and heaved all weekend long. But it was a friendship founded in adversity. So I will forever be yours.
Well, I should have said CEO and roomie, Pat Wood. Well, Mike, what would you tell all of us here as we lean into another important power conversation?
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to this conversation today. But, as we usually talk about, the economy and, energy markets, broader equity markets, the thing we want to first talk about is sort of the economic outlook. It just seems like this week there's really been a light week for economic stats. And on Thursday, you're going to have the PCE deflator. That's sort of Chairman Powell's preferred inflation measure. So I think the markets are going to really kind of be waiting for that on Thursday. So just look for some volatility in the bond market from that. From a stock market, broader market standpoint, we're almost through Q4 earnings, right? And so I think what you're going to start to see is the market's making all-time highs because some of these Q4 reports, especially technology, the AI stocks have been just fantastic. And so we're not going to have any of that going forward here, probably, for another 2 to 3 months. And so I think the markets are going to probably, sort of go sideways and may even go down. So, that's something that we're thinking about. I'd say from the commodity standpoint, what we're looking at is crude oil. We've been talking about crude oil over the last, couple of weeks and months. And crude oil now is, sort of to the upper end of its 3 to 4 month trading band from $70, $80 a barrel. We're at $79 a barrel on WTI today. And I think that's despite, U.S. inventories on crude really growing quite dramatically. And it's because of low, historically low seasonal refining runs. That's going to reverse about 3 or 4 weeks out, and you're going to start to see big crude draws. And so that's something to look at. One of the things we haven't talked about a lot recently, and us, we've always talked about this, is crude oil time spreads, specifically WTI time spreads. To us, that really we look at it for just give a gauge on what the physical markets look like. And what we've seen over the last 4, 5, 6 weeks is that WTI time spreads are now in deep backwardation. They moved from deep backwardation to contango, and they're now back in deep backwardation. And they're as backwardated as we've seen since October of 2023. Back then, WTI price was $90 a barrel. It's a little less than $80 a barrel. So we're watching that, especially as we come out of refining runs and crude start to basically draw. I think we're going to see crude oil is going to look a little bit better than it is. Something I'd say about on natural gas is obviously we remember last week we talked about Chesapeake and their conference call and them talking about not turning the line a lot of their gas production and gas production being down sort of like BCF exit to exit in 2024. And that really pushed prompt price up by 15, 16, 18 cents an M. And that is completely reversed. But what's interesting is the 12-month strip is up about 15 to 20 cents. And I think that makes a lot of sense to us because that's the market pretty much telling us that, guess what? Natural gas production is going to basically slow and it's probably going to decline. In the last 2 to 3 weeks, we've seen the U.S. market go from roughly 104 BCF a day now down to 102 BCF a day. 3 months from now, we're probably going to be down, closer to probably 100 BCF a day. So, that looks good. So we're really happy with that. I'd say the last thing we'd really talk about is, on the energy sector side, like we talked about the broader market, we're 90% of the way through. We still have some companies reporting this week, but we're essentially through the earnings period. It was a pretty good earnings period. Energy's up a little bit year to date. And so, that's something to be thinking about. The last thing we'd say is that, we've seen, another sizable E&P merger this last week with Chord and Enerplus. We're going to continue to expect that's going to happen going forward. And so one of the last things I really want to talk about, and it really kind of flows into what, Pat's going to talk about today, is we also look at a lot of these electric utility earnings, in Q4 reports. It's what stood out to us in these Q4 reports is these guys put out 4 and 5 year type CapEx spending plans, and they're just monstrous. I mean, they're up dramatically over the last year, 2 years, and dramatically up over the last 4 or 5 years. And so I think what you're going to see is that electricity prices are going up, CapEx is going up. Pat's going to talk about, demand over the last 20 years of being sort of flattish. Now it's going to be up, anywhere from 1.5, 2 to 3 times, depending on who you talk to. So we're really looking forward to getting that conversation.
Okay, awesome. Todd, what would you throw in the hat here?
Well, I'll just do a quick news item. Today we're going to talk to Pat about lots of different topics, but permitting, power, those are really going to be, at the forefront. We've continued to talk on the permitting front about LNG and this pause that the Biden administration talks about. And that continues to have repercussions. A news item on Sunday was that the Qataris came out and said, oh, by the way, we have a massive expansion planned and we're going to go ahead and expand our expansion. To put these numbers in perspective, the Qataris right now produce somewhere around 11.5 BCF a day of LNG. They already had an expansion of about 60% planned. And they explicitly said, they believe that their supply is reliable relative to other suppliers. And so they announced, sort of an extension of that expansion. And now they're going to expand by about 85% up to 21 BCF a day of LNG output by kind of late this decade, 2030. Mike just talked about how the U.S. is about 102, 104 BCF a day. So you've got this one country that's producing, 20% of what we do. Interestingly, not only do you have this sort of dynamic around our permitting regime and how that affects our security of supply, but geographically, the Qataris really do have a big advantage relative to where a lot of emerging demand is going to be. They are just closer to the Far East, to South Asia, and then you combine it with the geopolitical challenges that are making it difficult to access the Suez Canal. You've had weather challenges making it difficult to access Panama, and the U.S. geographically was already at a disadvantage. We're kind of stacking other disadvantages on top of that. And I think the Qataris have said, we're going to take advantage of that. So we'll talk a lot about domestic issues with Pat and how permitting affects things. But I just thought that was kind of a real-time example of the continuing, unfortunate effects of some of the actions that we take. So that, Maynard, turn it back to you.
Okay, awesome. Well, Pat, I mentioned it in the upfront. Right? You saw Texas as a regulator. You saw Washington as a regulator. You now see Texas as a CEO of a power business. You have so many vantage points on this. Maybe start by telling us a little bit about the Hunt Energy Network and kind of what you're seeing every day in terms of what you're working on, what you feel from customers, what you think the issues are, in particular in Texas, or the excitement. Just talk to us about the business.
Well, thanks, Maynard. And Todd, I had just one quick question on facts. So if Qatar's doing 11.5 today, what are we doing on LNG exports? US?
About 12. We're a little bit bigger.
Okay.
We're slightly bigger than they are, but they will jump back up. Yeah.
Well, the reason I asked, Maynard, is I grew up in Port Arthur, where oil was discovered in 1901. So my grandfather was the head manager of the Gulf Oil refinery there. So we that was our bread and butter. And my grandmother used to drive right through and it stink, back then they didn't have the air controls. And she'd say, that's good old bread and butter. Cause she drove a Continental and she didn't hurt for living in style. But, when I was at FERC, we ended up permitting 3 LNG import terminals.
Yeah.
That's to show you how quick that major determinant of our industry flipped with that epical, pop in 2008 of frack gas and the plentiful future of natural gas for the U.S. I mean, that was not where the world was going from 2000 to 2008. So when that popped, and then all those 3 LNG terminals, Cheniere, Golden Pass, and then the Semper one, which I think is Port Arthur LNG, which are now all being kind of flipped, or Cheniere's has flipped, but the other 2 are flipping to kind of go the other way. It's it just shows you that even with that multi-billion-dollar infrastructure in place, we got to be nimble. And so that's to answer your question about what's Hunt Energy Network is we see the future of powers, and I do and have for a while, is really decentralizing and shrinking. I mean, the massive big capital projects on the power grid, exciting and fun though they are, and I'm an engineer by training, so the bigger the steel, the more exciting it is. The more steel and concrete, I love it. But the little decentralized stuff is really the future. And so seeing that, we started in 2018 to think about where we wanted to slot in. And so batteries had just at that point become cost competitive with gas peakers. And so we said, let's get into that. Let's build it little, though, not these big batteries that some of our other friends have since built at 100 and 200 megawatts, but let's do 10 megawatt batteries scattered all around Texas. So that's what my 21 plants are doing today. Our 21 plants, I should say. It's not me, it's a full team here that's doing the work. But we're starting there. Winter Storm Uri really pointed out the need for it's not that batteries can't fill, which is the cold winter night. Batteries are great when the sun comes up in the morning and when it goes down through all days of the year in a state that's getting increasingly solar. Solar is plentiful in Texas. There's a lot of resource, particularly west of I-35, that's relatively clear all the time. And when it's hot, we're generating electricity. When it's cloudy, it's not quite so hot. So it's kind of one of these real pretty ones. The wind is a little more kind of at different times of day, but we've got a lot of solar, and solar got cheap about the same time batteries did. So
Can I ask you a question, Pat, which is, I'm just curious, a 10 megawatt battery power plant, like how big is that?
3 full-length tractor trailers sitting on about an acre.
Okay.
So up to now, we generally have looked for good spots next to utility substations on the low voltage side, and then we get an acre either right adjacent to the fence line or down the street, and then plug into the substation right there. And so that's been where we go in. But 3 tractor trailers, we will be the batteries, and then we have an inverter box next to those because it's a DC. You store power as direct current, but it moves as alternating current. So you have to transform that in with an inverter. And so that's we've kind of I don't know, rubber stamp those across the state.
That design hasn't changed much in the last 3-4 years?
The different battery technologies and most of these are lithium ion batteries that we contract from China. So we go through U.S. affiliates of Chinese suppliers and have had actually very good equipment coming from them. So there's a pretty high bar on quality that we're going to have to beat or match, at least here in the U.S. or with other suppliers. The Europeans have kind of priced themselves out of that, but Korean, Japanese, and Chinese are where you would look for the current battery technology. I was a past director of SunPower, which is a solar company. And at the time, we were vertically integrated and made our own panels. I want to get out of needing to buy my own technology. We are a service provider to the market in ERCOT, and so I want to be able to get my supply from anywhere. So right now, it's lithium ion from Chinese suppliers. We're looking forward to having more options, particularly on the domestic front, stimulated by the IRA, I presume. And just by general business people seeing this as a great business. But that has been the first part. And then to finish the Uri thing, Maynard, just quickly, we saw the need to get more peaking generation built in Texas. We have a lot of cheap renewables that fill in most of the hours, but you still need that insurance policy of perhaps a hot summer day when there's not enough wind blowing, particularly to fill in for that. And then really the cold winter night, like Uri again, or even Elliott last Christmas of 22 was a really stressful winter period when you had cold throughout the night. When you're not going to have solar, you generally don't have a strong wind resource. So you've got the coal gas and nuke that we've had here historically that's not really being augmented much. So you're going to need something that is low capital costs that can fill that void during those really expensive hours. And so that's where peaking generation, I think, for the grid of the future is going to be a really critical thing. And, if there's a place where the grid of the future is being written, the book is being written here in Texas, because we've moved so far, so fast on all of this cheap wind and solar. And then, of course, batteries have now followed, and Texas is one of the leading battery markets in the country as well. That in addition to all of our historical generation, coal, nuke, and gas, don't have much hydro here. As we want to get into the peaker. So we're actually looking at diesel. The capex for a diesel unit's cheaper than a capex for a gas unit. And I think some of the things we saw in Uri, in Texas, when we unpacked all the kind of what happened is, the gas system was pretty maxed out, and that's with a lot of the power plants were frozen off, and the gas system still had trouble. So now that we've kind of addressed, I think in pretty good part, I was surprised and pleased at how the winterization mandate that the legislature adopted in the aftermath of Uri has kind of permeated through the whole energy infrastructure in Texas, both gas and electric. I do sense that we're going to, with the future Uri, not have as many power plants freezing off, but still worry about the deliverability of gas from these very cold fields in West Texas in real time to a power plant. So I'm a big fan of gas storage, just like I am power storage. I'm not getting in the gas storage business, so don't worry anybody. But I do think that for that reason, I like having fuel in the tank right there next to my plant. So we'll be looking at that, and as far as our current investments, and have a few plants on later this year.
Pat, just for fun, I asked the battery question. You hear, I feel like we've been hearing more and more people talking about gas peaker plants. What does a gas peaker plant, look like? How much power does it have? What does it cost? How easy is it to do a gas peaker plant?
So a gas peaker and the peaker is kind of a good way of thinking about that. It runs relatively few hours of the year. Say, there's 87, 60 hours in a year. Say certainly 10% or less. I would generally think it's kind of my idea of a peaker. We're actually designing ours to probably run 5% of the year, because the unit cost is high to run a peaker. Gas or diesel is even higher. But when you need it, you need it. And so at that point, the market is paying for it. So you're not too worried about recovering your costs, but they're just not used as many. So the gas peakers, which we do have a lot of in the state, there's a lot that were built in the 70s before the Fuel Use Act prohibited the use of gas as a boiler fuel. Back in 73, we did have a lot of gas technology. Just Texas was, I think, 90% gas. And then when the Fuel Use Act came, about the time Texas was ready to explode in its very first kind of economic, well, maybe not first, but the one first in my lifetime economic boom, that's when we added the coal plants and the nukes at that point in the 70s and 80s. So, but at that time, there were a lot of gas plants built then. A lot of those retired when the competitive era started in 2000. And market competition shut down the inefficient units. We're kind of probably need to relook at all those original locations and with their brownfield. And I know a number of the companies that own the brownfield sites for these old plants are considering repowering those. That makes a lot of sense today with newer technologies. A gas peaker is a jet engine on its side. And so it's technology that's come a hell of a long way since the 70s when those were built. And, they still have high heat rates compared to a combined cycle. But again, I don't think the economics are going to, sadly, because combined cycles were, huge response to our competitive market in 99 through 05. We built, 20 gigawatts, maybe 30 gigawatts of new gas back in the early 2000s here in Texas alone, and then the country, all over the country. It's a great technology that's allowed us to shift from the older coal plants to cleaner burning gas plants, just in my professional lifetime. And so that happened in Texas a lot, but we're coming back to that again with the peakers. I don't know that other parts of the country are kind of there just yet, but we are there yesterday. So the gas peakers do use natural gas, and I think the challenge is, and this is where while I'm kind of leaning the diesel route, is that gas is needed on the same exact day when everybody else needs gas, and not really any other day of the year. So when the gas guys are the fussy, needy customer, every other baby needs its diaper changed on the same day. So it's like, well, gosh, that's a tough market to be in on fuel supply. Now, if I were sitting on top of a gas storage cavern, I'd feel different. That's like almost as good as on-site fuel.
So can we just pause on this, because you have some of these usage numbers, but what you're referring to is so much of the electricity is coming from gas production, and then coming from gas, and then so much of the heat, or there's a lot of heat that people are using gas for, that in these moments where you have this electricity, super need, and you turn on your peaker, it's just one more thing drawing natural gas at the same time that the heat users are drawing it and the electricity plants are drawing it.
And, and then one particular subsector of this, and I don't want to sound like a mean old miser, but the thing I'm hating a lot in the last 2 years is electric heat. I know that was the big embrace thing from a lot of the futurists that say we need to electrify everything. I'm like, do it in the right order. Because what we're doing now by having your house, and so now when I was a kid, 10% of the homes in Texas were heated by electricity in the winter. Now it's 62% of the homes in Texas. Sitting on top of all this natural gas, 62% of the houses have electric furnaces and not heat. And now a few people in that 62 have some energy efficient heat pumps, but by and large, that's just normal kind of cheapo electric resistance heating like every apartment in every part of Texas has in it today. And think about it. If you're heating your house with electricity in the winter, that electricity is not coming from solar because it's at night. It's not coming from wind because wind doesn't generally blow too much in the winter. It's coming from the nukes. God love them. They're running all the time. It's coming from coal plants and gas. And because the conversion factors in generating electricity, you generally only get about 40-50% of the heat value of the original gas or coal convert to electricity through the heat conversion process in a generator. You're burning twice as much gas, you electric heat user, as I'm burning with my natural gas furnace in my house. So not only is it cold as all get out in Texas and everybody's got their heaters on, is yours is using twice as much natural gas as mine is. And so all of us together are using a hell of a lot of gas all at the same time. When those gas generators that are generating electricity for everything else, not just heat, but for life, for the hospitals, for the lighting, for the internet, for the AI stuff. I'm not going to worry about the people who want to charge their cars in the middle of a winter cold storm. I'm going to say, y'all got to wait in line. But, all that, that's not an efficient way to do it. So if I were, the king of the universe, I would have said, decarbonize all this stuff first and then electrify it. But unfortunately, we've kind of done it in the back order. And so if electricity is the place where we're going to, get the efficient way to decarbonize our energy consumption, I would say we did it in a backwards order by doing all this electrification first, because we've ended up putting more emissions in the atmosphere by doubling our consumption of natural gas when we don't really need to. And then more importantly, there are a lot of other people that use natural gas who use 100% of the energy value of that gas, flowing the gas all the way to the pipe, not just home heaters, but all the people that run businesses and commercial enterprises and industrial sites throughout the winter. That would be it. We're taking away from them as well. And so we have lots of gas. I mean, the numbers that Todd talked about are significant. I mean, it's been probably the greatest energy story of my lifetime is the fracking revolution and the availability of shale gas to put U.S. back in kind of the driver's seat. It's been phenomenally effective on electricity prices. mean, our prices were kind of going up and up and up in 2008. And as one of the architects of the competitive market, it was kind of awkward to sit there and watch these prices go up. And then boom, from 2008, it's just been glory days because natural gas is setting the market clearing price, and there's a lot of it.
So let's pause on that, because that's great. That's something that has been coming up a lot here, about which power prices in various parts of the world, various states, et cetera. Give us a little history lesson, because there was that period that you're talking about from late 90s, early 2000s, where we were pushing towards more natural gas use from kind of an environmental standpoint, but the price of it was going up and up. So can you give us a history lesson of power prices?
So I was head of the PUC from 95 to 01, and George W.'s orders to me and my colleagues were, get us to a market. So let's get out of this utility business where utilities were all they cared about was what the government thought. And let's get everybody worried about what the customer thinks. And so, of course, that resonated with me. My dad was a retail businessman in Port Arthur, and boom, that was just gold to my ears. I said, I'll take the job. Yes, sir. I'll work and we'll get it done. So those era, we had relatively low natural gas. I mean, by low, I mean, I remember had just worked for the Railroad Commission right before he appointed me to the PUC. And I remember when one of the nukes had, all the gas producers would call Chairman Williamson at the PUC when the nuke was down for maintenance, and they said, can we keep that nuke down? Because of course that would lift up the natural gas prices. I think they were below $1 per MCF, like in that part of 92 or 90, let's say 93, 94. And then when the nuke came back on, of course, then gas prices got kind of suppressed downward. So I'm remembering cents and maybe low $1 things throughout the early 90s and mid 90s. So that definitely spurred, because the dislocation between the marginal cost of power. And again, gas is still, I think, probably the fuel on the margin in most every market in the U.S., except maybe Pacific Northwest, where you still always got a lot of hydro dominance. But even now, they're becoming more gas oriented. But the gas price for the marginal unit of electricity in the 90s was exceptionally low. So you're comparing that with the embedded cost in all the utilities rates, who had just rolled in nuclear and coal plants from the previous 2 decades, which are up here. And y'all alluded to the CapEx spend. I think either Mike or Todd had mentioned about the utility CapEx budgets that are kind of phenomenal. Some of these utilities still build generation in the vertically integrated states. We separated that out because it's competitive, and it shouldn't be a regulated, protected industry if it's competitive. So, but anyway, not every state is enlightened as Texas, so we have to live with that. But those costs, that dislocation created a real political support, primarily among our industrial customers in the mid 90s, to say, hey, we want access to this. We're sick of paying this. That's uneconomic. We're putting our stuff in Malaysia and Singapore and India. We want to come back home, but we want this cheap price, not this embedded utility price. So we kind of split the baby, but competitive markets pulled this. We did allow the utilities to recover their stranded costs, which still marks me as a heretic in some quarters of Texas. But it was the right thing to do, because we made a regulatory covenant with the utilities that if you build this, we'll let you get your money back, come hell or high water. And so we did. We kind of paid that off over time, and so that utility embedded price, we got down. So prices in Texas now are still, even with all this inflation, I think you have to, I guess, account for the inflation, but we're probably still about 30% off what we had been under regulation. When we opened the market in 2001, 2002, the Houston Lighting and Power price was about 10.5 cents. With inflation, I guess it'd be about, I think I saw the other day, 17.8 cents. Most everybody on my street's paying about 12, 13 cents for electricity now. So it worked. But the industrials, obviously at their higher usage factors, are are happy. A lot of them have come back to Texas. And a lot of new businesses are coming here. So it has been the economic development promise that we built the whole restructuring dream on, was really, we're going to make Texas a nirvana for energy. I think what happens, we got so focused on economics and did really well on it that we got a little slack on the reliability front. That's where Uri kicked us really hard and was just a train wreck. And so the fact that 200 plus people died because we didn't have a weatherized, prepared, efficient system for the winter storm, I still honestly wake up in the middle of the night and just am haunted by that. But I'll work through it. But if I was in a position to do something to put a fix back in when we opened the market in the 90s, and I couldn't have seen Uri coming in 2021, but we could have fixed some things that basically protected the people. But we are where we are, and I think we know what to fix going forward and get back to having a strongly reliable system. But we don't have time to waste. I mean, there's so much demand. Texas grew 8% 2 years ago and 7% last year. And I don't know what it's going to be in 24. Unbelievable. Well, we've never had that level of growth in this state, and we're seeing it across the U.S. Texas is probably an early mover, but we've got to get back in the saddle, because we need it, cheap, and we need it reliable, and we want it clean. And the clean part's actually solving itself, because wind and solar are, with or without a subsidy, the cheapest forms of electricity. So we're going to get plenty of that. I think we just want to make sure we don't get out of whack on the reliability front.
So you championed you really pioneered the market approaches to bring in all these new technologies and to do exactly some of the things you've been talking about, which is extremely important to Texas's business and future. But one thing that's interesting, when you have a free market system, and part of it is subsidized. My point is, when you have a free market system, you get a portfolio of power producing assets that you didn't necessarily design like an engineer, right? You kind of put out a help wanted sign, and then like 3 guitarists showed up, 2 drummers, 4 lead singers. You're like, okay, we got to sort this out. So when the market sorts it out, you then get a system that looks technically hard sometimes to operate and to make sure it is, quote, reliable and doing everything as a system you want it to do. If you were, how would you lean into this market system and fix a couple of these issues? Is it by changing the market so that the market then does what you want it to do, or is it by more direct things like the state is going to build the following, the state's going to build nuclear? Like what would you do to kind of fix this where we seem to be, if that's the right way to think about it?
It is the opening question, but it's the story of my career. So, it's what we have to do. This one's tricky, and not tricky. It's hard because the product moves at the speed of light. I drank the Kool-Aid on restructured industries as a staffer working for Jerry Langdon up at FERC when he was a commissioner. He's a Midland guy that y'all probably know, but he lives in Houston now. But the restructured gas industry was probably one of the best economic boons to the country, and it was even written up in the Economist magazine as the most successful of them. So I learned that. But that product moves at 20, 30 miles an hour in a pipe. This one moves at the speed of light over wires. And so you kind of have to overbuild the system. So a couple answers to your question. On the delivery infrastructure front, we can't have a just-in-time super tight system. We need a little flex in that system. Technology's been our friend here as we've got more efficient tracking and transmission technologies, and visibility on the system is much better. Our particular business has been, let's not just focus on the big multi-system interstate highway system, but let's go out to the rural country roads and beef those up with infrastructure so that we don't just have central station resilience, but we have it throughout and scattered all across the system, even at the edge of the system. I mean, we're literally at the edge. We're over southwest of Pecos, so kind of halfway between the solar farms and all the Delaware Basin load, which are very fun for a battery because they're bouncing like this with every cloud that blows over the sun. And then the loads, the pumping jacks and all the production area is jagged load like this. So batteries are great at leveling that out. But that's a niche business plan. But your question was broad, and so the delivery system needs to be more robust, but we also need to think about how the production of power gets done. And so we have some subsidized resources. The state of Texas passed the energy fund to effectively kind of level that playing field for gas and oil plants. So I'm not a big fan of fighting subsidies with subsidies. I'd have rather had none of them. But the IRA extended, ironically, for the two most cost-effective resources, they got 10 more years of subsidy. It's like, I could have spent the ratepayers' money or the taxpayers' money better than that. But anyway, wind, solar, now batteries, which we're taking advantage of, and nuclear power all got some lift in the IRA, but gas and coal and oil did not. So the state of Texas said, hey, we're going to give some low interest loans to people to do this. So an energy market like ours works best when things are relatively at ceteris paribus, kind of even. And so it's hard to know if that's going to really solve the thing, but it does kind of move it back to where it can be a more effective generation market. There's some other tweaks that we could delve into, but the other tweaks that need to happen in the energy system are kind of on the front burner right now here in ERCOT. I spoke to the NERC board. NERC is the kind of the air traffic controller for the power system across North America.
We had Jim Robb on, and it was really interesting.
He's one of my heroes. I love him. He, in fact, invited me to visit with their board when they came to Houston last week. And they're grappling with these same issues across the U.S. and Canada. We've got this major shift to a much more low carbon emitting system, good on the environmental front, but we got to rush to keep up on the technology front so that it stays reliable and dependable, so that people can really trust the system as they've done for the last century to work when they need it to. And so that back and forth, there's no one answer to it, Maynard. I do love the all of the above and all of the below scenario, which is, we get a lot of stuff from below the earth in most of the 20th century. We're getting a lot of the above the earth stuff in the 21st century. Let's just keep it all. I think pretty much like I mentioned the other day, anything built since the time of Moses, I would like to keep on the grid because we're about ready to grow. As I think Mike and Todd mentioned, we're going to grow 1.5x to 3x. This is an industry that since 2000 has been like this, flat. And like I said, Texas has already started the upturn, but the rest of the country will soon follow, where we're going to be electrifying everything, and whether it's in the right order or not. I'm not going to probably win that argument, but we got to get ready for it. And so every piece of power generating technology we have, plus a whole lot of power efficiency technology that we're building and gonna have, needs to be here and needs to be working today, because we needed it we certainly needed it before Uri. But this phenomenal growth, I just don't think we're ready for. And it's not been a big part of the relatively conservative culture really, I view the electric utility industry as probably one of the most conservative, in a good way, industries in our country's history, because they don't want to make a mistake. They don't because the costs of being wrong are too high. And so there's a lot of caution, but we can stay reliable and be cautious, but we got to be fast. And so getting this uptick and getting addressed not only on the delivery of power, but on its actual generation, is for me probably the story of the rest of my life and way beyond. All my kids have gotten into the energy world, and I think they listen to dinner conversations a lot and really kind of connect the dots that there's a lot to do here. And, we need bright people that are out of the box thinkers, that'll work hard, that are ready to do that. And you see them, you guys, I've been to your neat shop. I mean, you see these guys, you're investing in them. It's a fun and exciting time to be doing this. I mean, when I was a regulator back in the 90s, you'd go to Kathleen and I would go to cocktail parties and stuff, and people would say, what are you doing? That's I'm in the energy business. They go, I need to go get a drink. Now you say I'm in the energy business, I'm like flies attracted to the picnic. I'm like, you'll take it however you can get it, but it's come a long way on the cool factor. Well, it. You guys have all lived it too. You've gone from ostracized, smelly guy at the picnic to the star of the show because you're in this business that's kind of hot and going on. So take a bow, gents. Y'all are in the cool cat now.
Hey, Pat, one of the things, we brought it up earlier about just the growth is going to be exponential over the next 10, 15, 20 years. And the biggest concern I have as I listen to electric utility calls, developer calls, guys that actually provide the equipment, hook up transmission, is that there's going to be a lag just on the transmission side. I mean, so there's a lot of power to be put on the grid, but just not a lot of permitting being done. The transmission's not being done. And so, first of all, do you think that's an issue? And second of all, it seems to me like, distributed generation in that sort of scenario is going to be a really good business to be in. What do you think about that?
That's what the Hunt Energy Network is a play on, my friend Mike. I as a regulator, I did want to put a bet on both red and black because we wanted the big grid to be better, but we also wanted to presage what was going on with the little grid. So when I was at PUC and FERC, we did little grid rules as well, which weren't as heralded as our big grid stuff, but they're kind of being remembered now, and I'm glad they are. But it's like all of the above comment on generation is we really do need kind of big wires and little wires to be robust. I mean, I think the 7th or 8th person must have got a plug-in vehicle over where we live one time last year. And I started getting these notices on my car in the morning that we couldn't fully charge your car because of instability in the neighborhood or some kind of thing like that. My friends at CenterPoint didn't want to hear that, but I said, crap, we've got to invest in the power grid just in my neighborhood. So you kind of go from my meter back to the substation, which is the distribution grid. There's a lot of work that has to be done. That used to be a one-way grid that pushed everything from the middle out to my house. Now I'm pushing stuff back on with the solar panels on the roof. We've got all the people on the street with the electric cars that can go some of them, these Fords can go two ways. Teslas aren't that progressive, too bad. But, in the rural areas, you have little small windmills that have been there for generations. Those are contributing. We've got the community solar farms out in the middle of kind of rural Texas. So you've got everything all over pushing both ways on the grid. So that sort of resiliency, that the permitting issues on that, Mike, aren't near as tough as they are on the big grid. And they're a lot easier in Texas, just historically. But not simple, but easier in Texas than they are in a lot of the countries where you have either big federal lands, a dense population, or Native American tribes. Those issues make it really hard sometimes to build these large transmission projects to move power over the long distance. So as you can tell from my business plan, I've kind of bet that that's going to probably be the harder push to do the big grid than it will be to do the little. And so decentralizing this grid, I think, is a way to make it stay as resilient as it can be, while creating opportunities for I like the both. I mean, honestly, it's nice to have the big brother back there to support you if you're wobbling on the diving board, but otherwise it's nice to have it be in front of you. And so that's the bet on both outcomes that I think is the best for our country's resiliency. And so I've been kind of an apostle for that. In some of the other power markets is don't ignore either one. I mean, it really requires kind of a full-time job to get permitting, as you know. I mean, you guys have been talking about that since I came to y'all's office the first time a few years ago. the gas pipeline permitting is absolutely painful. This LNG thing that you mentioned in your opening about being paused is absolutely just the wrong direction. But that power is actually going somewhere else. But even it's just part of the whole infrastructure play here in the U.S. that it ought to be fair to the public. I'm not saying we ride roughshod over people's rights, but once you've had an adjudication, and that's what FERC's job was to do when I was at FERC and the PUC when we did transmission lines there, is you listen to people, you get the right, the most cost effective, but also people effective pathway. And sometimes the cheapest way wasn't the best way. So we'd have to do the third cheapest way because it avoided going over a cemetery or near a library or by a school or through people's backyards. So you kind of just do the blocking and tackling that's boring as hell, but so important to people. And that's where we cannot stop. A CEO once told me, he was head of an upper Midwestern utility. He said, "Pat, my job is a 24/7, 365 political campaign. I am constantly talking to my customers, to the politicians, to the mayors, to the policemen, to the fire departments every day of the year, and being a presence so that when we need to move infrastructure and enhance it or build it or expand it or remove it, they're on my side." And we have talked to them. It's an ongoing conversation, not just a parachute in when I need help, but a full going relationship. So that's why, honestly, I'm good friends and fond of all the work that our utilities have done, even though I was a tough regulator on a lot of them. At the end of the day, they're indispensable to our way of life. And so keeping them focused on that job of building the high quality infrastructure is only job. There's not a second job. That's why I wanted to get them out of generation and get them out of retail. You guys, your job is to build our delivery grid for the 21st century. And that's going to take a hell of a lot of capital, a lot of people, and a whole lot of attention and a bit of luck because our country's getting crowded. Not a bad thing. I'm a big populationist, but I do think, which means I like more population because that's the thing that's going to happen to a lot of the rest of the world. But I want to make sure that we've got room for our infrastructure because it's getting hard to site. I mean, it was impossible in the Northeast. We heard, Maynard and I were at a talk last week where we heard some of the horror stories about getting infrastructure into New England, but they're actually importing Russian LNG. Is that right, Maynard? I think it was.
They have a terminal and they fought to keep it open, which was sort of it was a victory at some level that they kept it open. It's unfortunate that they don't just have it coming in on a pipe from 2 states over.
Yeah, and I always, we had, even when I was at FERC, and this was under, I think, Pataki, but who was a Republican governor, New York was just as tough as hell to get anything to cross the Hudson River. I mean, to the point where back when I was a little kid, and this will really show my age, the Iroquois pipeline came in from Canada and went around New York and dropped into New England. And of course, Texas producers hated that because we wanted that market for ourselves in Texas. But the commission voted to approve that pipeline. But it was really all this stuff to kind of get around New York. And even the gas system, which has much more of a federal role in siting the pipelines, much more than the feds have a role in siting transmission lines, for example, on the power side. The Natural Gas Act just allows FERC to have more of a primacy role. It's still, at the end of the day, a state that's determined to thwart it. And we saw this on the oil pipeline side too, with the Keystone pipeline coming, that Nebraska could actually thwart what otherwise was done. The state of New York was very effective at just stopping. And this was before it became infected with a lot of the climate issue. It was just a NIMBY, and it probably had a pretty strong environmental component. I wasn't up there at the time. That was before, I think I was just getting out of law school and all that came through. But those New York, it's such a key part of the map. I mean, everything in New England has New York kind of blocking the way. So Pennsylvania and Ohio, big gas fields, a lot of good gas production, a lot of just, kind of probably not as red ass versions of Texas, but they're a milder version of Texas, kind of a nice balanced culture. They can't get above the Pennsylvania border to move that frack gas that's so cheap and plentiful into New England, who would love to have it. So it's my biggest, to kind of tie back to Mike's permitting issue. That's my biggest kind of worry in the medium term. I do think we'll continue to have good gas transport to a lot of the gas plants that are being built in the southeastern U.S. to replace the coal plants, because they were a lot more coal heavy than we were. So they're replacing coal with gas, as a lot of the world is trying to do. And so I think we ought to be supporting that effort as a pro-environmental thing to do, rather than impede the gas pipelines to get that additional gas to all parts of America. We should view that as an opportunity to kind of ease the, kind of allow the incremental demand to be met by natural gas, because those areas don't have the renewable resources we do. So you can't have the green dream there and say it's got to be wind and solar. I'm not going to allow any more gas into, say, Georgia. Well, there's just not a lot of wind and solar opportunities there. There's some. I think North Carolina's done a lot with solar, actually, so I shouldn't probably talk too far. But the need to get gas out of the production regions like our own here in Texas to the rest of the country is absolutely no different than it was when I first started at FERC and as a staffer there for Jerry back in 1990, 91. It's no different. All parts of the country need to have access to natural gas, because it is still the base load. It will become the base load fuel, and certainly the transition fuel. I don't even know if it's transitional. I was thinking about under what scenario would you be kind of done with natural gas, and I can't think of one. I mean, it may not burn as much of the year, and if we've got low emission or zero emission wind or renewable going all the time, fine. Use it cheaper. It's cheaper and whatever. But I sure want that certainty for when that Uri comes around, or when those clouds are over the solar plant in the middle of a hot ass summer day in August of some future year. I want to make real sure I got something there standing on backup, and I got to pay for it. So that's where the market design changes that are a little more nerdy to talk about today, but they're critically important in Texas and in the other power markets to make sure that we've got that insurance policy out there for when the other stuff doesn't work.
On this permitting, question that Mike had, one quick follow up, and then we'll turn it back to Maynard. But it seems like there's this commonality. You've got staff at FERC or the energy department. You've got these sort of people that are there thinking about this every day. But then it seems like the political appointees on both sides are swinging things maybe more than they used to. Is that true? Is there a way to minimize that? Probably not without a change in leadership, but it does feel like a change of administration brings on a much bigger change in the regulatory environment than maybe you mentioned that you started at the FERC in the early 90s. It just seems like the differences now are much bigger than they were 30 or 40 years ago.
And it's kind of grown with each, I would say, half generation. So when I was there, the biggest thing that changed with Bush taking over from Clinton was when we have more Republicans and Democrats, is the hydroelectric agenda became more development friendly. So I civil engineer, if there's anything I love more than a hydroelectric dam, I don't know what it is. I went to more dams than I will ever do. That was the greatest attribute of my job as head of FERC, because they do all the permitting for the hydro dams, the ones that aren't owned by the TVA and what have you. So I loved that part of the job. So there was never a dam, but we did, obviously deal with fish issues, Indian issues, but it was as a way of getting to yes. Mm-hmm. That one was always partisan, but it never affected the natural gas agenda until, I would say, in the last 10 years. And then so now that has kind of crept in on the gas side as I think it's not the right way to view where we are in the climate and clean energy type issues, to say that natural gas should not be augmented, that it should instead be shut down or dialed down. I mean, I don't think anybody says they want to shut it down tomorrow. I'd love to see how they keep their home cold, warm in the winter. But I think the expansionist view of natural gas is definitely not where the Democrat Party is today. And I would say the Republicans have kind of been, and even guys like Joe Manchin, who are kind of in the middle. So that's kind of your real bell cow is, where's a guy like that who's from a conservative state, but still is a Democrat and is pretty populist? What's he thinking? He's obviously very strong on getting the gas pipes and the oil pipes to move the product where it's needed, because we are not going to turn this economy in one generation to carbon free. We've started that bend. We've done a lot to reduce our emissions of not just carbon, but of all the other stuff that goes in the air. We've started that under Daddy Bush in 1990. And actually before then under Nixon, I think in the 70s when we had. So we've started that, as the U.S. has definitely bent the curve down toward a clean environment. It may not be fast enough for some, and maybe not be fast enough for all of us. I tend to be a conservative. Root word of conservative is conserve. So I kind of tend to let's assume that the worst can happen and not do it. But I don't want to be scared of the future either. So I'm one of those people that might be confused with armadillos, because I do like to be in the middle of the road on some of these issues. And I do want to clean it up, but I also want to maintain the stability and reliability and the cost effectiveness of the system we built so far. So that's why I love Texas, because it's proven that you can do both at the same time, and you don't have to do it with a whole lot of government intervention, as opposed to all this propping up that we're doing with all these other subsidies and programs for this and that. It's the market has proven here that customers want lower emissions electricity, and they're willing to pay for it. It actually ends up being cheaper than the other electricity. So that really is what put kerosene on the fire, is that it was the cost-effective thing to do to get to have a much more renewable power grid, which nobody dreamed 25 years ago when this was all started, that we would go anywhere with wind, much less solar. Solar wasn't even on the radar. We passed this little welcome mat part of the restructuring law in 1999 that Bush said, Pat, go get smart on wind. So we did, and we found out, okay, there's a few things we can do to give wind a fair shake. And, boy, we just needed to just open the door, and they came barging into the party and ate all the food. So it's been a great example of economics doing a good job for the environment. I really encouraged even foreign governments, when I'm asked to go talk elsewhere, is, folks, trust technology, trust the market, trust the customer. Don't pre-wire all this stuff, because it's going to inevitably be. I've never seen a government enterprise. Well, I'm sorry, I'm a big fan of Man on the Moon. Do think, and NASA did a pretty damn good job in the 60s. But they're trusting the market now too. We saw this plant from Houston land on the moon this week as a private company. So even NASA has bent the curve toward the market. I think we've done a pretty good job in Texas, Uri being the major exception, and it was a big one. But I think we've done a good job showing people that, the markets and the price signals and the investment signals that come from just getting out of the way do a pretty good job for these other goals that people say they want, which are clean, cheap, and reliable. There's a role for regulators. I did that job. I know it. I can tell you things that regulators aren't doing that they should do, and vice versa. But by and large, we've hit it about right. And I want to just say that's a pretty good model for other people to study and think about for their own parts of the world.
That was such a good answer. I don't want to mess it up, because it would have otherwise been a really good place to end. But as we have been talking to, for instance, we've had experts come on who've studied what Germany has done. And last week we had someone who had an opinion on what California has done. And we've as we have been around these, the decarbonization power impact discussion, and I'll throw in one last fact. I think I heard last week that New York power prices hit 40 cents a kilowatt hour, something like this, right? What we've been struck by, and Texas is very different. What we've been struck by is so many governments are not waking up in the morning and saying, we have got to have low-cost power because that's why industry comes. And when industry comes, that's why you have jobs. And when you have jobs, that's why you have everything that comes with a good economy. Texas does seem to have that mentality, and it's showing up. What's going on with these other jurisdictions? Like when you go visit these other places, it feels like the Western world better get really focused on that, because we're hurting some economies around the world by not thinking that way. Is that a fair way to think about this?
It is, and I was a big, and I'm going to remain. People can live with a few sins on the record, but Angela Merkel, the former prime minister or chancellor of Germany, they kind of went the green route and shut down their coal plants, and then after the Japanese nuclear disaster, they shut down their nuclear plants. And it's like, guys, we need all this. If you want to grow your economy, I mean, look what those political decisions in, what is that, the fourth largest economy in the world, Germany. Look what those political decisions in the last 2 decades have done to really, I wouldn't take a wrecking ball to that phenomenal economy. I mean, that post-war economy that we helped rebuild out of one of the greatest things ever was the Marshall Plan. It was truly magnanimous, but just good, righteous American doing the right thing. The country that made 2 decisions to shut coal and nukes, and now this last year they kind of got by on LNG because the Russian bear got pretty nasty. We couldn't use their stuff, so we had to bring in a lot of LNG and wind and solar. Well, in the winter, that was awful, and so industry now leaves Germany. So some of the best technology we have on the planet is not being made in that great. So policies matter, is what I'm saying. And I always be sure to thank the Californians, because their public subsidies have effectively been the R&D for our electric power industry for over a generation. So I'm going to say thank you, ratepayers of California, for paying for that. But look at the damage that's done to their industry and their economy and to their tax base and to their population. I mean, I don't need the energy guy to be the most popular one at the cocktail party, but I need people not to make these stupid ass mistakes that ruin their country and ruin their economy and make life worse for their neighbors and their friends and their family than better. I mean, we got to be pointing in the good guy way and not in the retrograde way. But unfortunately, there has been, and I think you're a much better student of history than I am, Maynard, but there have been people since time began that thought they knew more than the next guy, that they were smarter and better and could make decisions that dummy over there couldn't make. And you know what? I think history has proven that's a pretty sad trail of tears, is that the guy picking the winners and that guy deciding that this goes and this stays. I much prefer Adam Smith's power of all the market working together collectively to nudge those little decisions in the correct direction. And I'd like to hope and pray that Texas stays the exemplar for that, not just in the power sector, but across the economy, of letting market forces truly speak. And it's not ever perfect. I know there's going to be some regulator that's going to tweak something. I did it too. I'm sure there's some sins I've got to atone for in the final days. But by and large, if we err on the side of trusting the people, and by that I mean the customers, the people that vote with their dollars and vote with their investor dollars as well as their consumer dollars, that's just the right place to be. And so you mentioned Germany, you mentioned California, the other places. It's California can get, they had it in them. They were going to a competitive market even before Texas did, but they couldn't resist that urge to get in there and micromanage it. And you know what? That was fatal. And they had a power crisis that I had to go pick up the pieces of when I went to FERC in 2001. And that lasted, hell, that was half of my term up there, was picking up the pieces of the Western energy markets crisis of 99, 2000. But these things have impacts. And again, back to where we are here today in Houston, Texas, this industry that we're involved in is foundational. It's not just a nice add-on like Apple or something else that makes life fun and exciting. It's foundational. I mean, we saw just for rolling outages of a day or two how dreadful life could be without electricity in Texas during Uri. Imagine, and I still worry about this, if an electromagnetic pulse bomb got launched by our buddies over in Pyongyang over Kansas, what that would do to the North American power grid, or even just not even somebody with bad intent, but the sun. If the sunspots, instead of kind of veering toward Venus, if it came right to Earth. This happened in Quebec right before I took over the PUC. There was a sun storm that hit the power grid of Quebec, which, like ERCOT in Texas, is isolated from the rest of North America. It took it down for a couple of days. I mean, imagine if something like that happens in this much more electrified society. I do think that's money well spent is on the cybersecurity, physical security of the grid that we have to do.
It was like when AT&T lost coverage there, I guess it was last Thursday, and suddenly all your devices don't work. That was a very strange, I don't even know where the house phone is anymore. Like you can't, we've become so dependent. It's amazing.
I didn't know what was going on because my way of dealing with the news, with 2024 is don't read the news anymore. So I think between now and November 5th, I'm just not going to read the news. So I didn't know that anything was going on. So I'm walking to work. I'm at my sister's house here in Dallas. I'm walking a mile to work. And so I like to work the Wordle, the little game that everybody plays to guess the 5-letter word. So I'm sitting there going, I'm sitting there I'm like, what does SOS mean? And I finally about halfway there, I get to the Whole Foods. I'm like, well, they've got Wi-Fi. So I walk in their Whole Foods, should not forget Wi-Fi. I download the Wordle game. I walk out of there. I don't even find out what's going on around the world. I get to work 15 minutes later and everybody's like, can you believe the whole grid's down? And I'm like, well, of course it's down. It's National Margarita Day. That's going to happen, So that was a wild event. But I think maybe the message to myself is don't give up the news. You need to keep in touch with a few things. So I do love the energy news, and I love what you guys are adding to the environment of intelligence, and I'm honored to have been your roped in calf today. So thank you for this. It's been fun I miss you guys. It's good to see y'all even in 2D.
It's fantastic, and you were exactly the calf we needed, one with perspective and history and a good sense of humor and optimism, which is what we all need. So we can't thank you enough, Pat. This was awesome.
Thanks, Maynard. And thanks, Mike and Todd. Good to see you guys again. I'll get over and visit y'all in the office one day soon. Just catch up.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody.